So with where you're at in your life,
Yep.
do you feel like you know within yourself that we are 100% not alone?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And you 100% believe with every
No, I
part
don't
of your
no,
body,
no. I don't call it belief. It's not belief.
you know.
It's by sheer experience.
Mm-hmm.
Talking to hundreds of people around Australia,
Yeah.
qualified people, military people, members of the general public, all that kind of thing. People that bring enormous credentials sometimes to their own sightings and that kind of stuff, and my own sightings as well. I was kind of lucky.
So you've had your own sightings.
Yeah. Well, I guess the
What have you seen? Tell me what you've seen.
well, I had one event back in 1969 that because I was diving deep into the subject by then, but not really investigating the subject quite yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm out on the middle of the Clarence River on a surfboard, middle of the afternoon, on a mate's surfboard, doing what you do on a Saturday afternoon, and I'm looking across to the river's edge, and I see all this white material coming down, and I immediately thought, oh, right, this could be spider's web stuff coming down, because there were some famous cases, particularly in France back in the early 50s at Oulon and Gillac, two locations in France that involved structured objects and all sorts of material that would come down. When this white material came to the ground, people would handle it and it would disappear in their hands. And
What?
yeah, and I thought, well, yeah, that's interesting. But a lot of people speculated it must have been, for those people that are phobic about spiders, you probably want to stop listening at the moment. But really, if you realised how much traffic there was up there from little baby spiders that are doing what's called balloon webs, ballooning across the skies, like huge arrays of web with little baby spiders attached to them, they're flying.
Really?
That's why they call it ballooning.
I've never heard of this.
They sit on a high point, spin the web, the wind catches it, and up they go.
Yeah, wow.
It's their way of travelling.
No way.
There's stuff comes down everywhere, but
And that's what you thought that this
that's what I thought it was.
Yeah, okay.
And I thought, oh yeah, great. I'm going over there to have a look at it. So I paddled my way over to it, get out of the water, walk up, and there's stuff everywhere. And I'm picking it up, and I'm looking at it, and I roll it up into a ball. I can't see any little. The first thing I expected to see were hundreds of little spiderlings. That's what they call little baby spiders.
Yeah.
And there's none there. I thought, they must have decamped pretty quickly, but that was unusual. They usually are very slow, and they just start spreading out. And I'm looking at this stuff, and I roll it up in the ball, and then it disappears on me, and it went from what appeared to be like a solid to a gas. And
From a solid to a gas.
yeah. A few years later, I'm at university training to become a chemist, industrial chemist. And I learned more about a term called sublimation. It means it changes and misses a standard phase, like solid. The usual transition is from solid to liquid to gas. You go through all those three steps. But what appeared to be happening here, I'm looking at a solid, it disappears, and it appears to be gas. Now, somewhat foolishly perhaps, in retrospect, I put my hand up to my nose. No serious after effects unless you call UFO obsession a serious problem. But anyway, but I'm looking around and I'm thinking, what the fuck is this stuff? It's not spider's web. And I'm racing across to my mate's place who had borrowed the surfboard off, and I run into the kitchen and scream out to his mother, give me some glass jars, will you? Screw top lids, please. Empty. Yeah. And I'm running out with him. She's used to me. She was used to me at that point, coming in with all strange requests. And I run back to the river's edge. There's nothing there to be seen. The spider web type material is gone. I dive into the water, paddle the surfboard about half a mile down the river in the direction of the wind, and nothing in evidence. I get back home, Mum and Dad are talking about seeing something strange go overhead. I'm thinking, what? I hadn't looked up at any point. I'm looking at this stuff on the river's edge. And so that was the first thing I thought, wow, did I actually come close to examining what they referred to as angel's hair, this material that was linked to UFOs? I thought maybe not. But it was decades later that another case occurred up in far north New South Wales, near Tenterfield, I think, from memory. And it was, but this time it was so close to like a rerun of the early French reports in the 1950s. Dumbbell-shaped object, sparks seemed to be coming from it, going to little discs, and moving backwards and forwards, and down would come this debris and all that kind of stuff. And it was a really interesting report. But that 1969 event was probably the first thing that was close to real UFOs for me. And
why would something that's travelled, like millions and millions of light years or whatever across the galaxy, travel that far in an object, in a craft that leaves traces of itself or leaves debris as it's flying through our atmosphere?
What do you think we do with our own cars as we travel around the countryside?
Yeah, I get that.
We leave tyre track marks, rubber marks, we leave exhaust fumes, we leave all sorts of things.
Yeah.
We can track our own height of technology for humankind to get around.
Yeah.
Even aircraft do it, leave behind traces of, and so this angel's here.
Do our aircraft leave like physical traces though that we can like pick up?
I won't get into the chemtrail type debate. That's another subject in its own matter. But and a lot of it's full of paranoia and conspiracy theory and all that kind of stuff. But aircraft at a certain altitude, you'll see the contrails, and that's the exhaust coming out, and you can see that. And if you were there sitting on the back of the aircraft taking samples, which you wouldn't be, but you could get a measure, an interpretation, maybe, of what makes this thing, the aircraft, tick. If you were an outsider, same goes for UFOs. If you look at a case like potentially angel's hair, that it might well represent a pathway into what might be going on inside it, that kind of stuff. So it was, for me, I'm getting more and more into the world of physical science, thinking, let's look at this. This might be a way of figuring out what's going on with UFOs. No, it was, you needed to collect data. Most people are making their own minds up about UFOs and flying saucers, and now UAPs, like UAP, what a term. Like, are we going to call this field, we call it ufology now. We're going to call it upology, an apology to the unidentified. It's kind of, I kind of hope that UAPs move on, but UAPs are now being picked up big time by academia, military intelligence, that kind of stuff. So I'm comfortable using that term, but even a mate of mine, this guy here, one of the better researchers, if you want a good summary of what's going on about UFOs, get this book by Robert Powell, UFOs. Yeah. Science explains what we know and don't know about UFOs.
Right.
It's a great book. He gets into the argument about, well, terminology, it was flying saucers or Foo Fighters, or then it becomes, from flying saucers it becomes UFOs, and from UFOs it becomes UAP, or unidentified aerial phenomena. It's kind of gone full circle. The term UAP was used by the military back in the 50s briefly, and by various players in more recent decades to try and get away from the stigma of UFOs and flying saucers.
Yeah.
Make it more mainstream, more like, we don't want to study UFOs, but we will study UAPs. Well, why? Because UAPs don't have that connotation with all the baggage that hitchhikes along with UFOs. But give it time. It's already got that baggage. UAPs, a strong baggage with congressional inquiries about crashed UFOs and stuff like that. It's all crashed UAP now, aliens, whatever. or time travelers, or goodness knows where else. There's all sorts of possibilities involved. But I was more interested in going beyond listening to individual people telling me about what's going on. I wanted to see the phenomenon myself and do the classic mainstay of scientific experimentation. That is the repeatable experiment. And the best way to do that is to go hunting UFOs. And if you can find out about a locality where there's like a breakout of sightings, particularly if it's isolated and it's away from built-up areas, they're the best kind of areas. And I was kind of very lucky during my university career to have one of those highly localised, isolated breakout areas at a place halfway between Grafton and Armidale. And Armidale is where I was going to University of New England, of a breakout location called, it's a little village. Well, that's a big call calling it a village. There's only about one house there. It's a service station, cafe kind of thing that services local properties and drive-through type people. So this little area called Tyringham, for some reason, started to repeatedly have UFO sightings by the locals and people passing through. And a local electronics technician, Warwick Ford, he told me about this, and he was servicing local farmers and people living in an area that he was hearing and seeing UFO sightings. And he lived up the back of that, behind the ridgeline of the cafe, up on a property called Mollydale. And so I was going up there. I was literally going up there every weekend for a period of about a month or two. And almost as soon as I arrived, I'm seeing UFOs. And we started to bring in equipment. Like, here we've got a...
You were seeing them the second you pulled up? You were seeing them?
Not quite that. It was generally speaking mainly during the night. But
like straight away, I mean, not like the second.
What I was doing straight away was initially trying to get my handle on, I'm trying to be a human vacuum cleaner, sucking up all sorts of information, trying to figure out what are these people seeing? Is it explainable or is it unexplainable? And it turned out that while there were events that were mistakes and misinterpretations, there were an awful lot of things that seemed to be going on. Like, you think about it, like we would be able to create this now with drone technology and whatever perhaps, but here we had, back in 1973, people at the cafe looking out over what was locally called Boney Mountain. And this is where they used to congregate, and play games, and objects were seen, dish-shaped things.
Boney Mountain.
Yeah.
I think that's what I've...
I think it's actually called Mount Highland.
I'm not too sure. There's a mountain in Australia that I was actually wanting to ask if you knew anything about that's apparently got big UFO sightings.
Oh, you're probably thinking of what's the place?
I think it's up near Northern Territory.
Pine Gap. That's Mount... God, I talk about it in my book. Momentary blank out, but I do it in a footnote here. The name comes at Mt Zeil.
Yeah,
Mt Zeil.
Yeah.
It comes up in my book here with the alien. I'm talking about remote viewing, and it was the remote viewers.
Okay, all right.
That come up with the I think 3 or 4 locations around the world, and one of them was Mt Zeil, and the research guy, I think it was Hal Potoff, Dr. Hal Potoff at the...
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah.
I know of him.
Yeah.
He was on Joe Rogan not long ago.
Yep. Well, he's been in and out of this game for quite a long time, but
with remote viewing, right?
Yeah, he was asked, as it turned out, the Stanford Research Institute was basically a cover. It was the CIA that were paying for the research. They wanted they heard that the Soviets were doing this kind of thing, and they thought, well, we don't want the Soviets to get ahead of us. Let's check out what this is all about. And so they got Stanford Research Institute scientists, particularly Dr. Hal Potoff and Dr. Russell Targ, to do some basic experiments in psychic research. And initially they were studying the people like Uri Geller and a whole bunch of different players. But then they got into remote viewing. and initially seemed very, very hokey to begin with, but then they started to get some verifiable results. And I thought, what the hell? And this is how the Mt Zeil angle comes up. One of the better remote viewers said, I've been doing some remote viewing, and there's several facilities around the world, and one at Northern Territory near one of in Central Australia at Mt Zeil. Anyway, Hal Potoff, through various connections, because he was obviously the contact point for this research for the CIA, knew or through various people who the current CIA station chief at Pine Gap was. Contacted him and ring him up and said, anything unusual happening around Pine Gap? No, nothing ever happens here, mate. And he said, oh, yeah, the only things that have been happening are all the UFO sightings around Mt Zeil, which is about, what was it? I went out there at one point, trying to remember. It was hard to keep track of the mileage because you're on pretty rough roads going out to Mt Zeil.
Yeah.
And but it's not that far. It's like an hour or something like that, hour or two. I can't remember quite how far it was now. There's nothing to see there. There's no opening portals or anything like that. It's just a mountain, a rough-looking mountain kind of stuff. Nice looking spot. You can climb over it and all that kind of stuff, but maybe there's something down there, maybe there's not, but you can't see anything from outside. But according to the Goss, there's maybe something going on there, but who knows?
Have you ever been there?
I just said, yeah, I have been there.
You've been there?
Yeah, I've driven out there.
Sorry, my bad.
Yeah.
I thought you were telling me a story of someone else that had been there.
Yeah. No, I'd gone to Alice Springs to look into UFO sightings and some stories of possible UFO crashes out the back of Alice Springs. And obviously we did the routine of getting up on the ridge and looking at Pine Gap and all that usual routine. But we were mainly interested in all the UFO stories coming out of it. And one of them at that time was Mt Zeil. So off we went to Mt Zeil, and we're thinking, well, there's nothing to see here. Like we're not on a need-to-know basis here. We don't know what we're looking for. If there is something here, it's very hidden. But who knows? Yeah. So there's a rich bunch of anecdotal stories about what happened or what is going on at Mt Zeil, but nobody's been able to verify it outside in the public realm anyway.
Right.
So it's an interesting place.
So
a lot of Aborigines see UFOs in that area. It's rich.
In like ancient Aboriginal art, like hieroglyphs and whatnot, there's a lot of UFO depictions.
Absolutely. There's a lot of Aboriginal art communities off to the west of Alice Springs, and they're very close to Pine Gap and other places. And some of the current artists, they put into their paintings aliens and UFOs and crashed UFOs as well.